She bought a cave house by the river for $250. She thought she found a quiet place to start over, but the walls held something far more than stone. What she found inside changed her life forever. Would you ever live in a place like this, even if it held someone else's story? The fluorescent lights in the county assessor's office flickered with the rhythm of a dying heartbeat. Iris Caldwell sat across from a clerk whose nameplate read Morton in tarnished brass, watching him count her money for the third time. $250.20, her last unemployment check, laid out on the scarred desk between them like an offering to something she didn't quite believe in. "Ma'am," Morton said, not unkindly, "I need to be clear. The property is listed as uninhabitable. No electricity, no plumbing, structural concerns. You understand what that means?" Iris nodded. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air, acrid and tired. Somewhere a copy machine whirred and stopped. 3 weeks after her 41st birthday. And this was what remained. A room that smelled like other people's Mondays, and a decision that made no sense to anyone, including herself. "I understand," she said. Her voice came off flat, emptied of inflection. She'd been speaking less and less these past months, her words rationed like something precious she no longer had enough of. Morton slid the deed across the desk. The pen he offered was chained to the counter, and when she signed Iris M. Caldwell in handwriting she barely recognized as her own, the scratch of ballpoint on carbon paper sounded too loud, too permanent. "Good luck," Morton said, and something in his tone suggested she'd need it. The borrowed truck rattled down County Road 17 until the asphalt gave up and became dirt. Iris drove slowly, her hands tight on the wheel, despite the empty road, despite there being nowhere else she needed to be. The steering column vibrated under her palms, and she realized with dull surprise that her hands had stopped trembling. For the first time in months since that night, since the hospital, since the funeral she'd attended like a ghost at her own haunting, the constant shaking had stilled. The road descended through a tunnel of budding maples, their branches knitting overhead. Then the trees opened up, and there was the river. It moved slow and wide, brown-green like old glass, carrying the memory of recent rain. Silt clouded its edges where the current slowed. The sound of it reached her even through the closed truck windows, a constant whisper, neither welcoming nor hostile, simply present in the way ancient things are present. And there, carved into the hillside above the water's bend, was a cave. Not fully a cave, not quite a house. The entrance was a natural limestone hollow, perhaps 15 feet across, its mouth darkened by shadow. Someone decades ago, by the look of it, had built a crude stone facade into the opening. Mortared river rock formed walls on either side of a wooden door that hung slightly crooked on rusted hinges. The door itself was weathered silver gray, and above it, barely visible, were marks carved into the limestone lintel. Names, maybe, or words, too worn by time and weather to read from the road. Iris parked where the dirt track ended and sat, engine ticking as it cooled. A kingfisher called from somewhere downriver. The sound echoed off the limestone cliffs, sharp and wild. She thought about turning around, about driving back to the friend's spare room she'd been occupying like borrowed furniture. But there was nothing there either. Just the same gray fog that had filled every room since David died, since she heard his last breath in the hospital and understood that some sounds you carry forever. She got out. The air smelled of wet earth and river minerals and moss and something older, the particular scent of limestone that had been underwater once, 100 million years ago when this whole valley was ocean floor. Her boots sank slightly in the mud near the truck. The gangplank to the cave entrance was 3 weathered boards laid across stones. They flexed under her weight but held. Up close, she could see the craftsmanship in the facade river rocks chosen for size and color, fitted together with care. The door had been painted once, green perhaps, but only flakes remained. The key Morton had given her was brass, heavy, warm from her pocket. It turned in the lock with surprising ease, as if someone had oiled it recently, though she knew that was impossible. The door swung inward with a groan that seemed to come from the hill itself. Inside, The cave breathed cool and damp against her face. The main room was larger than she had expected, perhaps 20 feet deep, carved from living rock. The walls were limestone, pale gray and porous, damp to the touch, where she steadied herself against the doorframe. Moss grew in the corners, where water had found paths through stone. In the dimness, she could make out shapes. A rusted wood stove against one wall, a broken cot with springs showing through. Mason jars scattered across stone shelves like the remnants of some careful life interrupted. But there were other things too. Hand-carved wooden shelves fitted perfectly into natural alcoves in the rock. A crude mirror frame made entirely from river stones, each one placed with intention. Someone had tried to make this beautiful. Someone had lived here and cared. The floor was smooth stone, worn down by feet or time or water. Iris stepped fully inside, and the river's whisper became muted, replaced by the cave's own acoustics, a different kind of silence, amplified somehow, expectant. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the open door, painting the far wall gold. In that light, she saw them clearly for the first time. Marks on the walls near the floor, not random scratches. Deliberate carvings, symbols she couldn't read, patterns that repeated, and what looked like words in a language she didn't know. Iris sank to the stone floor, her legs simply giving up. The coldness seeped through her jeans immediately. She wrapped her arms around her knees and looked at the golden light on gray stone, at the evidence that someone else had sat exactly here, had carved meaning into rock because they needed to say something that would last. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty cave, to David's ghost that followed her everywhere, to herself. "I'm sorry." The words echoed back soft, layered, almost gentle, her own voice returning to her like something she lost and was just now finding again. It was the first time she'd spoken aloud in days, maybe weeks. The echo made it feel less like talking to nothing. She sat there as the sunlight moved across the wall, revealing more carvings, more proof of human persistence. Outside, the river kept its constant whisper. Inside, the cave held her like a cupped hand, dark and cool, and somehow impossibly patient. The first night, Iris slept in the truck. She had intended to stay inside the cave, had even unrolled her sleeping bag on the stone floor near the wood stove. But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, the cave's breath grew too cold, too intimate. The walls seemed to press closer in the beam of her flashlight, and every small sound drips of water finding path through limestone. The settling of old wood felt amplified, deliberate. So she retreated to the truck cab, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled like someone else's closet, and watched the cave mouth through the windshield like it might swallow the moonlight whole. By dawn, the river had filled the valley with mist. Iris woke stiff and unrested, her breath fogging the windows. Through the haze, she could just make out the cave entrance, that dark hollow in the hillside, patient and unmoved. Her hands, she noticed, were still steady on the steering wheel, no tremor. The absence felt strange, like a sound she'd grown so used to she only noticed it now in its silence. She needed supplies. The realization came with daylight. She couldn't live on the granola bars and bottled water she'd brought. The nearest town, according to Morton's scroll directions, was 6 miles back up the county road. Voss Hardware occupied a weathered building on Main Street, its windows displaying rakes and seed packets and signs advertising bait. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust and machine oil. A woman stood behind the counter, 60-something, with iron gray hair pulled back and hands that looked like they'd rebuilt engines. "Help you?" Her voice was neither friendly nor unfriendly, just factual. Iris approached with her mental list: candles, matches, rope, buckets for water. "I need some basic supplies." The woman's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're the one bought the cave place." It wasn't a question. Small towns, Iris remembered, were their own kind of cave system sound, traveling through tunnels of gossip, faster than light. "Yes," Nora Voss. She didn't offer a hand. "You need warmer blankets than whatever you brought. Spring nights get cold here, and that cave holds damp like a grudge." She pulled 2 thick wool blankets from a shelf behind her, the kind that weighed like arguments. "You got a way to hold water?" "I was going to use these." Iris held up 2 plastic buckets. Nora made a sound that might have been a laugh. River's a quarter-mile round trip. Those'll give you blisters by day 3. Take the canvas ones easier on the shoulders. She moved through the store like someone who'd memorized every nail's location, gathering items Iris hadn't thought to need. Kerosene for lamps, a whetstone, work gloves. I can't afford all this. Didn't ask if you could. Nora tallied the total on the paper receipt. Pay what you can now. Rest when you're able. It was the first kindness anyone had offered in months, and Iris felt something crack in her chest, small, painful, like ice beginning to thaw. She paid what she had and carried her supplies to the truck, Nora's voice following. You need anything, you come back. That cave's been empty a long time. Takes patience to make it home again. Back at the cave, Iris spent the afternoon hauling water. The canvas buckets were heavy but balanced. And Nora had been right. They sat better on the shoulders. The river water tasted of iron and minerals, slightly gritty if you didn't let it settle first. She filled the old jars she'd found, wiped clean of dust and cobwebs, and lined them on the carved wooden shelves. That's when she noticed it. The shelves weren't random. Each one aligned perfectly with where morning light would fall. She traced the angle from the door to the alcoves carved into the stone, realizing someone had understood this space with geometric precision. The wood stove, too, sat exactly where heat would circulate best through the single room. Whoever had lived here hadn't just survived. They studied, planned, made choices that whispered of long-term hope. She ran her fingers along the shelf edges and felt the chisel marks still sharp after decades, each cut deliberate. On the ceiling beam above the stove, nearly hidden by shadow, she found numbers carved deep. 1,947. 77 years. The cave had been someone's home for longer than Iris had been alive. She lit a kerosene lamp as dusk gathered, and the smell filled the space sharp, slightly sweet, nothing like the electric lights she'd grown up with. The lamp cast moving shadows on the walls, and in its flicker, the carvings near the floor seemed almost to shift. She knelt, studying them more closely. Not random scratches, symbols, repeating patterns. And words, definitely words, though in a language she couldn't read. German, maybe, or Dutch. Hello? A voice from outside, young and curious. Iris startled, her heart sudden and loud. She rose and found a boy standing at the cave entrance, maybe 9 years old, holding a string of clean fish that gleamed silver in the fading light. My grandma said someone bought the cave. He spoke like he was reporting news. She told me to bring these. We got extras. Iris stared at the fish, then at the boy. His jacket was too small, his sneakers muddy, but his eyes were bright with the kind of fearlessness only children and fools possess. Your grandma is Nora? Yeah, I'm Theo. He held out the fish like an offering to something he half believed in. You the cave lady now? Cave lady. As if it were a title, a role someone had to fill. I guess so. Iris took the fish, cool and solid in her hands. Thank you. Theo studied the cave interior with open fascination. The last cave lady died before I was born. Grandma says she left marks everywhere. Says she was remembering things so she wouldn't forget. Remembering things so she wouldn't forget. The phrase echoed in Iris's mind as Theo waved and disappeared back up the path, his small figure swallowed quickly by the gathering dark. That night, Iris stayed inside the cave. She cooked one of Theo's fish on the wood stove, the first fire lit in that chimney in who knew how long, and ate, sitting cross-legged on her sleeping bag. The fish tasted clean, faintly of river, and she realized she was hungry in a way she hadn't been in months. Real hunger, not the hollow kind. She lay down as full darkness settled. The kerosene lamp turned low. Outside, the river kept its constant murmur. Inside, the cave breathed wind moving through cracks she couldn't see, finding paths through the hill's ancient stone. Small animals rustled in the brush beyond the door. Water dripped somewhere deeper in the rock, a rhythm like a pulse. For the first time since the accident, since the hospital, since the funeral, since all those nights she'd lain awake, waiting for David's footsteps that would never come, Iris felt held rather than trapped by silence. The cave's darkness wasn't empty. It was full of something patient, something that had weathered 77 years and was willing to weather more. She whispered into that darkness, "Who were you?" The echo came back soft, layered, "You, you, you." And beneath that, so faint she might have imagined it, the sound of water moving through stone, not threatening, but constant. A lullaby sung by geology itself. Theo returned 3 days later with a camping lantern, the kind that ran on batteries and cast white LED light in a perfect circle. "Grandma says you can't see good enough with candles," he announced, setting it inside the cave entrance like a tribute. "She says if you're gonna live here, you gotta see what you're living with." After he left, Iris stood holding the lantern, feeling its solid weight. When she clicked it on, the cave transformed. What had been shadow and suggestion became concrete. Every crack in the limestone, every water stain, every mark on the walls, suddenly visible with a clarity that felt almost invasive. She started at the back wall and worked forward, kneeling on the stone floor with a pad of paper and a piece of charcoal she'd found in Nora's hardware store. The cold seeped through her jeans immediately, settling into her bones, but she didn't move. Her knees pressed against limestone that had been ocean floor once, and she traced the first carving with the charcoal, feeling the ancient chisel marks guide her hand. The scrape of charcoal on paper became a rhythm. Trace, lift, study, move. The lantern hissed softly beside her, a sound like breathing. Most of the carvings clustered near the floor, as if whoever made them had sat exactly where Iris knelt now. The symbols repeated in patterns she couldn't decode. A bird with wings spread wide, appearing 7 times across different walls. A circle with lines radiating outward sun, maybe, or a flower opening. Tally marks grouped in 7s, dozens of them, like someone counting weeks or prayers or days survived, and words. Phrases in what she was almost certain was German, carved deep enough that running her fingers over them, she could feel each letter like braille. Her hands had stayed steady all week. No tremor as she worked, no shaking as she lifted the water buckets or split kindling for the stove. It was as if the cave had absorbed her fear, held it in its limestone walls where it couldn't touch her. When she traced every visible carving, she sat back and studied the patterns. Someone had lived here long enough to develop a visual language, repeating symbols that must have meant something, comfort or prayer or simple proof of existence. "I am here," the carving seemed to say. "I was here. Remember me." Nora made the introduction over the hardware store counter, writing a name and number on the back of a receipt. Dr. Amara Singh. Teaches history up at the community college, but she knows more about this valley than anyone living. You show her those tracings, she'll tell you what they mean. Nora's eyes were sharp, with something that might have been concern. "If you're gonna dig into that cave's past, better do it right. Doctor." Singh's office occupied the 2nd floor of the college's oldest building, a room so packed with books and maps and photographs that Iris had to turn sideways to reach the desk. Singh herself was perhaps 55, with silver streaking her black hair and reading glasses hanging from a beady chain. Nora called ahead. Singh cleared a chair of journals, gesturing for Iris to sit. "She said you bought the river cave. I'm amazed the county finally sold it." Iris spread her charcoal rubbings across the desk like evidence of a crime she couldn't name. "I found these on the walls. I thought you might know what they mean." Singh went very still, the way people do when they've just seen something they'd given up hoping to find. She pulled the tracings closer, her fingers hovering over the German phrases without quite touching them, as if they might burn. "These are from Greta Hoffman," she said quietly. "I've been trying to access that cave for 15 years. The previous owner refused everyone." She looked up at Iris. "You know who she was?" "No." Singh rose and pulled a book from a shelf with the precision of someone who knew exactly where everything lived. She opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon and turned it toward Iris. A photograph, black and white and slightly out of focus. A woman in her 30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes that looked directly at the camera, with something between defiance and exhaustion. Greta Hoffman, German immigrant. Arrived in 1946, after the war. She bought that land for almost nothing and lived in the cave for nearly 30 years. She was escaping something, or maybe someone. Sin paused, choosing words carefully. Her husband died in Dachau. She came to America alone, built that cave house with her own hands, and refused to leave it until she died in 1975. Iris stared at the photograph, at the woman who had knelt on the same cold stone, carved the same walls, someone else who had survived impossible loss in that exact space. Can you translate this? She pointed to the longest phrase, the one carved deepest into the stone near the sleeping alcove. Singh studied it, her lips moving silently. Then she spoke, and her voice was gentle, as if she understood the words would land heavy. Her bin ich, hier lebe ich weiter. She met Iris's eyes. Here I am. Here I continue living. The words settled in Iris's chest like stones dropping into deep water. Here I continue living, not just surviving, not just existing, living. Choosing it actively despite everything. She carved these after Jacob died, Iris heard herself ask, during and after. The tally marks Singh pointed to the groups of 7. Those might be weeks. Counting time passing, proving it passed. The bird appears in Germanic folk symbolism as a soul departing and returning. She was documenting her survival, making it permanent. Iris thought of her own silence these past months, how she'd stopped speaking because words felt like lies. But Greta had carved hers into stone, had refused to let grief erase her. Did anyone visit her? Eventually, she worked as a seamstress in town. People said she was stern but kind. She'd mend clothes for free if children outgrew them. Singh closed the book gently. But those first years, she was alone. And she survived it. That night, for the first time, Iris didn't sleep in the truck. She dragged her sleeping bag inside the cave, positioning it near the carvings Greta had made. She lit 3 candles and set them in mason jars, their flames casting moving shadows that made the bird symbols seem to flutter. Outside, the river kept its constant whisper. Inside, the cave breathed around her wind, finding paths through limestone, water dripping somewhere in the dark like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Iris lay in her sleeping bag, staring at the stone ceiling, where Greta had carved 1947 into a beam. 77 years ago, another woman had lain in this exact darkness, choosing to continue despite loss that should have ended her. I'm here too, Iris whispered to the cave, to Greta's ghost, to herself. The echo came back, layered and soft. Here too, here too, here too. And for the first time, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like conversation, like someone answering across the years, yes, I know, I was here once, and I survived. Iris closed her eyes and listened to the cave breathe, feeling held by something larger than grief, older than loss. The stone walls had witnessed Greta's survival. Now they would witness hers. Iris woke at dawn on the 7th day and watched light enter the cave like water filling a vessel. It came through the doorway first, pale gold and tentative, touching the stone floor in a narrow band. Then, as the sun rose, the light crept forward not randomly, but with geometric precision. It reached the first carved shelf, exactly as the angle changed, illuminating the bird symbol there for perhaps 3 minutes before moving on. By full sunrise, it had traced a path across every major carving, as if Greta had choreographed a daily performance where stone became stage and sunlight the only actor. Iris sat wrapped in her wool blanket, mesmerized. The light on limestone was like honey, golden, viscous, somehow warmer than light had any right to be. Outside, river mist softened the valley, and birds began their territorial announcements, each species claiming different registers of sound. She hadn't drawn in 2 years, hadn't touched charcoal except for tracing Greta's carvings. But now her hands moved almost without decision, pulling the sketchpad onto her lap, capturing the light's arc, the way it transformed stone from gray to amber to something that looked almost alive. The act of drawing felt like remembering how to breathe, after holding your breath too long, painful at first, then necessary, then almost natural. By mid-morning, she was working on the stone facade, trying to remortar the river rocks that had come loose over decades of weather. The work was harder than she'd expected. Her shoulders ached, and the mortar kept drying too quickly in the spring sun. Finally, she gave up and sat at the river's edge, letting her bare feet dangle in the current. The water was cold enough to ache, moving with the patient inevitability of something that had worn down mountains. She watched leaves float past, spinning in small eddies before continuing downstream. "You're doing it wrong." Theo stood on the bank behind her, backpack slung over one shoulder. "The mortar. You gotta keep it wet or it crumbles." "Thanks for the tip." But Iris found herself smiling small, brief, but real. Theo dropped his backpack and sat beside her, immediately searching for the perfect skipping stone. "Grandma says you used to be a teacher. Art teacher. Before." "Before what?" The question was so direct, so unencumbered by adult pretense, that Iris found herself answering honestly. "Before I lost someone." "Like they died?" "Yes." Theo nodded, selecting a flat gray stone and sending it skipping across the water 3, 4, 5 perfect bounces. "Grandma says the river takes sad things downstream if you let it." He glanced at her. "You just gotta let go." Iris watched the water carry away leaves and light, watched it flow without pause or apology. Time made visible, grief given current. That simple? Probably not. Theo handed her a stone. But Grandma's usually right. After he left, Iris sat watching the river until her feet went numb. Then she whispered to the water, to David's memory, to her own guilt, "I'm trying," and watched the words dissolve into current, carry somewhere she couldn't follow. That afternoon, while remortaring the facade with water-dampened mixture, Iris noticed something odd. One stone near the sleeping alcove didn't match the others. It was limestone, not river rock, and it sat slightly proud of the wall. She worked it free carefully. Behind it was a hollow space, and inside that space, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, was a metal box. Her hands shook as she carried it to the center of the cave, where afternoon light fell strongest. The oilcloth crackled as she unwrapped it, releasing the smell of must and time. Inside the box were 3 letters, the paper yellowed but intact, covered in careful handwriting. "My dearest Jacob," the first began. All 3 were addressed to him, though they'd clearly never been sent. Iris read them sitting cross-legged on the stone floor, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Greta's English was formal, slightly stiff, as if she were translating thoughts from German. She described building the cave house, how she'd studied where sunlight fell, where water would run, where heat would gather. She wrote about learning to fish, about the first winter when she nearly frozen, about the slow process of teaching herself to survive. But it was the final letter that broke something open inside Iris's chest. "I thought I would die from missing you." Every morning I woke expecting death to have found me in the night, to have taken mercy and ended this. But death is particular about its timing, and it had no interest in me. So I learned something else. I learned what it means to continue. Not to move on, that phrase the Americans use, as if grief were a place you could leave behind, but to continue. To carry the missing and still walk forward. To carve your name in stone so someone knows you were here. Even if no one comes looking. "I am here, Jacob. I continue living." Perhaps that is how you live on, not in memory alone, but in what I build after. Iris read the words 3 times, tears finally coming after 2 years of numbness. They fell hot and fast, dropping onto the yellow paper, and she didn't wipe them away. She let herself break open in this cave that had witnessed another woman's breaking, another survival. She understood now. Greta hadn't been hiding in this cave. She'd been choosing it daily, actively. Every carving a refusal to disappear, every mark on stone a declaration that grief wouldn't erase her. Iris had thought she was running away, but maybe she'd been running towards something instead. That night, a thunderstorm rolled down the valley with the sound of distant artillery. Iris sat at the cave entrance, watching the river rise, watching rain hammer the water's surface into chaos. Lightning illuminated the cliffs in stark white flashes, and thunder echoed off stone like the earth's own heartbeat. The river swelled higher than she'd seen it, muddy and muscled with spring runoff. But the cave stayed dry. She understood suddenly how deliberate Greta's choice had been, not just any cave, but this one, positioned just high enough, angled just right, sheltered by the hillside's bulk. Every detail calculated for survival. The storm raged for hours. Iris sat watching, wrapped in wool, feeling something ancient in the stone at her back. The cave had weathered 77 years of storms. It had held Greta through winters that should have killed her. Now it held Iris through a different kind of storm, the one that had been breaking inside her chest since the night David died. If you felt a place speak to you like this in stone and echo and the patience of water, you know how it changes everything. Sometimes the shelter we need isn't escape, it's witness. As the storm eased and the river slowly calmed, Iris pressed her palm against the cave wall, feeling its coolness, its permanence. She thought of Greta sitting in this exact spot, making the same choice, to continue. Not to heal, not to forget, but simply to continue. I'm still here, Iris whispered to the darkness. And the echo answered, here, here, here. Not lonely anymore, not ghost. Just truth, reflected back through stone that remembered everything and judged nothing. 3 weeks after moving into the cave, Iris discovered the pattern. She'd been documenting the bird carvings methodically, sketching each one in her pad with notes about location and size. 23 birds total, scattered across the walls in what had seemed like random placement. But that morning, with sunlight slanting through the entrance at a particular angle, she saw it. The birds formed a map, not of geography, but of time, of transformation. The first cluster near the entrance showed birds with wings folded, heads tucked, 7 of them, huddled like grief made visible. Moving deeper into the cave, the birds began to change. Wings slightly lifted, heads raised. By the sleeping alcove, they were mid-flight, caught in the moment between earth and sky. And on the back wall, in the deepest part of the cave, where Greta must have carved last, a single bird soared with wings fully spread, so large it spanned from floor to ceiling. Iris stood in front of it, her charcoal stick forgotten in her hand. The final bird wasn't just carved, it was polished smooth, as if Greta had touched it thousands of times, rubbing the limestone until it gleamed. She pressed her palm against it and felt warmth. Not from the stone itself, but from where afternoon sunlight hit the wall, channeled through a crack in the ceiling she never noticed before. Light fell directly onto this bird, and only this bird, for perhaps 10 minutes each day. Greta had choreographed even this, the final symbol, illuminated daily, a reminder that transformation was possible, that what began folded and broken could learn to fly. That afternoon, Nora appeared at the cave entrance with a paper bag of supplies and something else in her expression recognition, maybe, or approval. You're looking steadier, she said, studying Iris with those sharp eyes that saw too much. I'm working. Iris gestured at the restored facade, the clean shelves, the small herb, garden shit planted using river stones to mark the border. That's not what I meant. Nora stepped inside, running her hand along the wall where Iris had remortared the loose stones. You're standing different, breathing different. She paused at the sleeping alcove, looking at Greta's carvings like old friends. I knew her, you know, the woman who lived here. Iris's pulse quickened. Greta? Stern woman, hands always moving, sewing, carving, building. She'd mend clothes for free if kids outgrew them too fast. My mother's wedding dress, Greta altered it 3 times as Ma lost weight from the cancer. Nora touched one of the bird carvings gently. She told me once that survival was a choice you made every morning, that some days the only brave thing was getting out of bed and continuing. Did she ever talk about why she came here? Not the details, but you could see it in her, that kind of loss that follows you like a shadow. Nora met Iris's eyes. Same thing I see in you, though yours is starting to thin a little. Let more light through. After Nora left, Iris sat on the stone floor and let herself remember what she'd been avoiding for 2 years. The accident had been ordinary in its horror, a wet road, a moment of distraction, her phone buzzing in the cup holder. David reaching for it, saying, probably your mother again, his voice holding that familiar mix of affection and exasperation. The truck appearing around the curve too fast, her swerve, the impact that rewrote time itself. He'd lived for 3 days in the hospital, long enough to tell her it wasn't her fault. Long enough for her to know he was lying kindness at the end, not truth. She'd killed him by looking away for 2 seconds, by not being vigilant enough, careful enough, good enough to keep him safe. Iris spoke this aloud to the cave for the first time, her voice breaking. I killed him. I was driving and I looked away and he died because I couldn't keep my eyes on the road for one more second. The echo came back layered. Killed him, away, away. But beneath that, the river's constant whisper. And in the walls around her, Greta's testimony carved in stone. Here lebe ich weiter. Here I continue living. Iris thought of Greta, who had survived when Jacob hadn't. Who must have asked herself 10,000 times why she got to live when he was murdered in Dachau. Who had carried that question to this cave and carved her answer into limestone? I continue, because the alternative is letting his death erase me too. I thought continuing meant I didn't love him enough, Iris whispered. That if I really missed him, I'd stop. I'd disappear. The echo answered softly, disappear, disappear. But that's wrong, isn't it? Her voice steadied. Greta knew. Continuing isn't betrayal, it's testimony. It's how love persists after death, not in stopping, but in what we build after. She pressed both palms against the cool stone wall, feeling the chisel marks under her fingers, feeling the permanence of what Greta had made from grief. Maybe you felt this too, the weight of surviving when someone you loved couldn't. The guilt that makes you want to disappear rather than continue. If this moment speaks to you, know you are not alone. Sometimes understanding we're part of a longer story of survival is what finally lets us breathe. As evening approached, Iris made a decision. She found her own chisel, a small one from Nora's hardware store, and chose a space on the wall near the door, where morning light would fall. She carved carefully, 2024, Iris Caldwell. Here I continue. The act took an hour. Her hands cramped and the chisel slipped twice, gouging deeper than she intended. But when she finished and stepped back, her name sat beside Greta's date like a conversation across 77 years. 2 women, 2 different losses. The same choice made permanent in stone. Theo found her there at dusk, studying her carving with something like, "Wonder, you're putting your name up too?" He sounded pleased. Seemed right. Why did she write on walls instead of paper? He touched Greta's bird carving absently, the way you'd pet a familiar dog. Iris considered. Because paper disappears. Stone stays. She wanted to be remembered, even if she thought no one would come looking. And you? I've been trying to disappear for 2 years. The truth came easier now, making myself smaller and quieter until maybe I just fade out completely. But Greta taught me something. Stone remembers. And maybe being remembered matters more than being comfortable. Theo nodded with the solemnity of someone much older. Grandma says you can't erase yourself without erasing all the good you did too. Says it's disrespectful to the people who loved you. After he left, Iris sat at the cave entrance watching the river catch the last light. Her hands were callous now, fingernails permanently rimmed with stone dust and garden dirt. Her shoulders had broadened from hauling water. She stopped apologizing to shopkeepers for taking up space in their aisles. The grief hadn't disappeared. It sat in her chest like the river stone she'd placed at the center of her herb garden. Heavy, permanent, smoothed by time, but never erased. But she was continuing around it, building something that acknowledged the weight without being crushed by it. As full darkness fell, she lit 3 candles and placed them in mason jars throughout the cave. Their flames made the bird carvings seem to flutter, made her own carved name glow like something sacred. I'm here, she whispered to David's memory, to Greta's ghost, to herself. I'm still here, and I'm starting to think that's exactly where I'm supposed to be. The echo came back gentle as breath. Here, here, here. And the stone walls, having witnessed 2 women's refusal to disappear, held her like a promise that survival was not just possible, but holy. Autumn arrived, like forgiveness slow, certain, inevitable. The valley transformed over the course of September, green bleeding into gold and rust, and the particular red of maples preparing for sleep. Iris documented the change in charcoal sketches that she pinned to the cave walls beside Greta's carvings, creating a dialogue across time. Greta's birds of stone, Iris's trees of carbon dust. 2 women, 77 years apart, both trying to capture beauty as proof that it existed, that they'd witnessed it, that they survived long enough to see it? She'd been in the cave 4 months now, long enough that her body had adapted shoulders broader from hauling water, hands permanently calloused, skin darker from working outside in all weather, long enough that the cave no longer felt like shelter from something, but simply like home. On a Tuesday morning in early October, she woke to find frost painting the riverside grass silver. She built a fire in the wood stove, a skill that had taken weeks to master but now came as naturally as breathing, and set water to boil for tea. While it heated, she chopped onions and herbs from her garden, their smell sharp and alive in the cold air. The rosemary had survived better than she had expected, growing thick and fragrant near the cave entrance where morning sun lingered. She stripped a few stems and added them to the pan with oil. Nora had traded her for a sketch of the hardware store. The smell of cooking filled the stone room, wood smoke and rosemary and onions turning golden, and Iris found herself humming. The sound surprised her. A tune she didn't recognize, possibly invented, rising without thought or permission. David had always been the one who sang while cooking, filling their kitchen with off-key renditions of songs he half remembered. She thought music had died with him, but here it was, returning like migratory birds, unexpected, inevitable, proof that absence doesn't mean extinction. Nora appeared mid-morning with a loaf of bread still warm from her oven, wrapped in a kitchen towel that smelled of yeast and care. "Thought you might want something besides fish and wild greens?" she said, stepping inside without invitation, a familiarity Iris had come to appreciate. Nora studied the cave with open approval, noting the restored shelves, the swept floor, the garden visible through the door. "You've made it yours. I'm trying to make it ours." Iris gestured at the walls where her sketches hung beside Greta's carvings. Turns out she left room for someone else's story. They sat on cushions Iris had sewn from old wool blankets, drinking tea from mismatched cups, the wood stove ticking as it cooled. Nora broke the bread and they ate it with butter and the last of summer's blackberry jam. "I knew her, you know," Nora said quietly. "Greta, I was maybe 7 when she died. My mother took me to visit, sometimes said it was important to check on people living alone." Iris leaned forward. "What was she like? Stern? Kind? Her hands were always moving, sewing, carving, building. She'd mend our clothes for free if we outgrew them too fast." Nora smiled at the memory. "She told me once that she survived worse than being poor. Said when you make it through the worst, everything after feels like borrowed time. Might as well spend it being useful." "Did she seem happy?" Nora considered. "Not happy, exactly, but settled. Like she'd made peace with carrying weight. She belonged here. People knew her, mattered to them." She met Iris's eyes. That isolation, it wasn't permanent. It was just what she needed at first. A chrysalis. The word hung in the air between them. Chrysalis. A place of transformation, not destination. Something you eventually emerged from, changed. That afternoon, while cleaning near the sleeping alcove, Iris counted the bird carvings again. 23 total. She documented each one, but she never stopped to ask what kind of bird Greta had been carving over and over. She took photographs with her phone, a luxury she'd finally justified after Nora helped her set up solar panels, and texted them to Dr. Singh. The response came within an hour. Swallows. European barn swallows specifically. Did you know they migrate over 6,000 miles and always return to the same nesting site? Iris sat down hard on the stone floor. Swallows, birds that left and came back, that traveled impossible distances and still found their way home. Greta had carved them 23 times, not as symbol of departure, but of return. Reminding herself that leaving didn't mean lost, that home could be rebuilt, that migration wasn't abandonment but survival strategy, the tears came differently this time. Not the breaking open of Section 5, but something gentler. Recognition. Gratitude. She wept because Greta had been so deliberate, so patient with her own healing, carving the same message over and over until she believed it. You can leave. You can return. Both are allowed. The meteor shower arrived on a Friday night, predicted by the weather app Theo had taught her to check. She spread blankets outside the cave entrance, and near midnight, Theo and Nora appeared with thermoses of hot chocolate and extra wool throws, they lay on their backs, 3 bodies in companionable silence, watching light streak across the darkness. The river murmured its constant song, different now, Iris realized. Not threatening or alien, but familiar. A voice she'd learned the language of. Make a wish, Theo whispered, as a particularly bright meteor burned across the sky. Iris closed her eyes. For 2 years, she would have wished to undo the accident, to rewind time, to trade places with David. But tonight, lying on earth that had held Greta's grief before hers, listening to the river that had witnessed both their survivals, she wished something else. Thank you. Not to anyone in particular. Just gratitude, general and specific, for the stubbornness that had brought her here. For the cave that had held her while she broke apart and slowly reformed. For Greta's testimony carved in stone, proving that continuing was possible. For David, whose love hadn't ended just because his life had. She thought about him and felt, for the first time, something other than guilt. Felt the warmth of memory without the burn of shame. Felt grateful for what they'd had instead of destroyed by what they'd lost. Living on isn't theft, she thought. It's how love persists. Beside her, Theo had fallen asleep, his breathing soft and even. Nora reached over and squeezed Iris's hand once, then let go. Above them, light kept falling, meteors burning across atmosphere, proof that even destruction could be beautiful if you survived long enough to witness it from the right distance. The river flowed on, carrying memory downstream without drowning in it. The stone walls at Iris's back held the carvings of 2 women who'd refused to disappear. And somewhere in the darkness, swallows slept in their nests, dreaming of migrations they'd survive, returns they'd make, distances they'd cross just to come home again. Iris pulled the wool blanket higher and let herself feel it. Not happiness exactly, but something close. Peace, maybe, or permission. The cave breathed around her, and she breathed back. And for the first time in 2 years, her breath didn't feel like apology. It felt like presence, like proof, like the beginning of whatever came next. The first snow came in late November, transforming the valley overnight into something both familiar and strange. Iris woke to absolute silence, the kind that only snow creates, muffling even the river's constant voice until the world felt wrapped in wool. She rose and added wood to the stove, watching through the cave entrance as dawn painted the white landscape pink and gold. Her woodpile was stacked high against the outer wall, covered with a tarp she'd secured with river stones. Mason jars lined the shelves, filled with dried herbs, preserved vegetables, beans and rice bought in bulk from town. She spent October preparing for this, not with fear, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone building a future tense. She was ready. More than ready. She was home. While water heated for tea, she moved deeper into the cave, into the sleeping alcove where morning light rarely reached. The lantern's glow revealed something she somehow missed in all her month here. A carving so large and detailed it covered the entire back wall of the alcove, hidden all this time by shadow and her own distraction. A map. Greta had carved a complete map of the valley, every bend of the river, every stand of trees, the hills rising like waves frozen in stone. It must have taken years. The detail was extraordinary. Individual trees suggested by careful cross-hatching. The cave itself marked with a small star. Even the path to town traced in delicate lines. At the bottom, in letters worn smooth by touch, Greta had carved, "So wurde ich immer wissen, wo ich war." And below that, in English, "So I would always know where I was." Iris ran her fingers over the lines, feeling the decades-old chisel marks. Greta hadn't just been documenting the landscape. She'd been anchoring herself to it, making it permanent, ensuring that even if memory failed or fear returned, she'd have proof. This is where I am. This is where I chose to stay. The anniversary arrived on a Tuesday, 2 years since the accident. Iris woke to the date before she fully woke to consciousness, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. She lay in her sleeping bag, watching her breath fog in the cold air, and let herself feel it, The weight of this day, the way it pressed against her chest like stone. Instead of running from the cave, from memory, from herself, she sat up, made herself remember. The wet road, her phone buzzing, David reaching for it, his voice holding that familiar affection. Probably your mother again. The truck, appearing too fast around the curve. Her swerve instinct, not thought. The impact that rewrote everything. His last 3 days, the hospital machines, his voice getting quieter. It wasn't your fault, Iris. You hear me? It wasn't your fault. But it had been. She'd looked away for 2 seconds, and he'd paid with his life. Iris spoke this aloud to the cave, all of it, holding nothing back. She spoke until her voice cracked, spoke until the words became sobs, spoke until she was empty. The echo carried it. Fault, fault, away, away. Life, life. And then, gradually, the echo faded. The cave fell silent, and Iris was still there, still breathing, still alive. She wiped her face with shaking hands, got up, made tea, fed the fire, made breakfast oatmeal with dried apples and cinnamon, ate it slowly, tasting each bite. She could hold the memory now without being crushed by it, could carry David's death without letting it kill her too. The stone walls stood witness, judging nothing, simply holding space for her grief to exist and pass and return and pass again, like seasons, like breath. The blizzard hit that evening, a howling storm that shook the cave entrance and sent snow spiraling horizontal across the valley. For 3 days, Iris was trapped inside, cut off from town, from Theo and Nora, from everything except the cave and her own company. Instead of panic, she felt held. She read Greta's letters by candlelight, traced every carving with her fingers, learned the bird symbols by heart, and then she began adding her own marks to the walls, not words this time, but images. She drew David's face from memory, capturing his smile the way she remembered it best, slightly crooked, genuinely warm. She drew the river in summer, the way light caught on water. She drew the swallow that had nested near her garden in September, wings spread mid-flight. Her charcoal-stained fingers moved across limestone that had witnessed Greta's grief and now witnessed hers. The candlelight made shadows dance across the walls, turning static carvings into something that seemed almost alive. Outside, wind howled. Inside, Iris drew testimony. I was here. I loved. I survived. I continue. She was making her own map now, not of geography, but of transformation. Proof that the woman who'd bought this cave to disappear had become someone else entirely. Someone visible. Someone present. Someone choosing life even when life hurt. On the 4th morning, the storm broke. Iris opened the door to find the world remade in white. The sun so bright on snow, it hurt to look directly at it. She stood blinking in the doorway, breathing cold air that tasted clean and sharp. Voices carried across the snow. Iris, are you okay? Theo and Nora were digging a path toward the cave, their shovels scraping against frozen ground. They worried. They'd come to check on her. Iris's throat tightened with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or belonging. The simple miracle of being missed. I'm fine. She called back. More than fine. Come in, I'll make coffee. They sat around the wood stove, hands wrapped around warm mugs, while Iris showed them her new drawings. Nora studied David's portrait for a long moment, then looked at Iris with understanding. You're a lot like Greta, she said quietly. Stubborn, strong, unwilling to let grief have the final word. Iris thought about this. I don't think I'm strong. I think I'm just still here. And I decided that was enough. That's exactly what strength is, Nora said. Theo traced one of the swallow carvings with his finger. Are you going to stay forever? The question hung in the cold air. Iris looked around the cave at Greta's testimony carved in stone, at her own drawings adding to the conversation, at the life she'd built from ruins. I don't know about forever, she said slowly, but I'm staying through winter, and then we'll see. The cave gave me what I needed. Maybe someday someone else will need it too. She understood now. This place wasn't a destination. It was a chrysalis, just as Nora had said. A place of transformation, not imprisonment. She could stay or leave, and either choice would honor what had happened here. After they left, Iris stood at the cave entrance watching light move across snow. Somewhere in the valley, buried under white, the river still flowed. Somewhere above, swallows were flying toward warmer places, trusting they'd find their way back when spring returned. She pressed her palm against the stone door frame, cool, solid, permanent, and felt the cave breathe around her. Felt herself breathe back. Not haunted, not hiding, just continuing. And that, she thought, was exactly enough. Spring came slowly, then all at once. The river swelled with snowmelt, its voice changing from winter's whisper to something louder, more insistent. Iris's garden dormant under snow for months shot green overnight, rosemary unfurling, thyme spreading across stones, wild flowers she hadn't planted appearing like gifts from the earth itself. She'd been in the cave a year now, longer than she'd stayed anywhere since David died. Longer than she'd thought possible when she'd first signed those papers in Morton's fluorescent-lit office, her hands shaking, her future a blank page she couldn't imagine filling. Dr. Singh arrived on a Tuesday morning in early April, bringing news and pastries from the bakery in town. They sat outside the cave entrance, the sun warm enough now to make sitting still a pleasure rather than an endurance test. I published the article, Singh said, pulling a journal from her bag. Regional History Quarterly, the cover showing one of Iris's photographs of Greta's bird carvings. It's being called one of the most complete personal testimonies of immigrant survival in the region. Greta's being remembered now. Museums are interested. Graduate students want to study the site. Iris held the journal carefully, looking at Greta's work reproduced on glossy paper, contextualized and explained and honored. She felt something settle in her chest, a promise kept to someone she'd never met. Greta had carved her story into stone so someone would remember, and now someone did. Thousands of someones. Thank you, Iris said quietly. You're the one who found it, who understood what it meant. Singh smiled. You gave her a voice again. After Singh left, Iris walked to the county office and filed paperwork to officially claim the property. No longer just inhabiting it, but choosing it. She met with a contractor about solar panels and a plumber about running proper water lines, modernization that would honor rather than erase what Greta had built. The cave would stay a cave, but it would become a home. That afternoon, she registered for community college art classes starting in the fall. 2 courses, Fundamentals of Teaching and Drawing from Life. Small steps toward returning to who she'd been, or discovering who she might become. Building a future tense again, one choice at a time. Theo appeared the next morning with a sapling willow wrapped in burlap, its roots bundled with damp earth. Grandma says willows bend but don't break, he announced, setting it down carefully. Like you and the cave lady, she said you should plant it by the door. They dug together, Iris with a shovel and Theo with his hands, until the hole was deep enough. The sapling went in easily, and Iris packed earth around its roots, imagining it growing tall over decades, its branches sweeping down to brush the river, its roots holding the hillside steady against erosion and time. She was planting something that would outlive her, participating in continuation that stretched beyond her own story into stories she'd never witnessed. The willow would grow, and someday long after she was gone, it would shelter someone else who needed a place to transform. Make a wish, Theo said. Iris closed her eyes, hands pressed into damp earth, and wished for the same thing she'd wished on the meteor shower. Thank you. That evening, as light began its slow fade toward dusk, Iris stood inside the cave with her chisel and added one final piece to the wall's testimony. Beside Greta's intricate map of the valley, she carved 2024, Iris Caldwell, here I continue, and below that, in smaller letters that took an hour to complete, for Greta, who showed the way. For anyone who comes after, who needs to know. Grief doesn't end, but neither does light. Both are permanent. Both can be survived. She stepped back, chisel still in hand, and looked at what they'd created together across 77 years. Greta's testimony and hers, intertwining stone. The cave wasn't a hiding place. It was a lantern carved from limestone, holding the light of every life that had refused to be extinguished. Stone as the eternal present tense, light as the opposite of forgetting. At sunset, Iris carried a blanket outside and sat at the cave entrance, positioned exactly between interior darkness and the valley's fading gold. The river moved before her, carrying snowmelt toward oceans she'd never see. Behind her, the carvings glowed in the last light. Greta's birds, her own drawings, their words promising continuation. She was neither the woman who'd arrived broken a year ago, nor the woman David had known in their life together. She was the woman the cave had helped her become. Someone who understood that survival could look like sitting still in stone while the world moved around you. That grief and joy weren't opposites but companions, carrying equal weight, both demanding to be witnessed. That the bravest thing wasn't moving on or letting go, it was continuing when you had every reason not to. A sound made her look up. Birds, dozens of them, crossing the valley in formation. Swallows, returning from wherever they'd spent the winter, navigating thousands of miles to come home to nests they left behind. They wheeled across the sky, their flight perfectly synchronized, then began settling into the cliffs, the same cliffs where Greta had carved their image 23 times. Reminder and promise that return was always possible. Iris watched them until the light failed completely, until the valley filled with that particular blue that comes just after sunset, just before full dark. The river's voice changed in the dimness, becoming something almost musical. The stone at her back held warmth from the day's sun. She thought about David not with the crushing guilt that had defined the past 2 years, but with simple love, with gratitude for what they'd had, with acceptance that his death didn't require her disappearance, that carrying his memory forward meant continuing to live in ways he'd have wanted her to live, fully, bravely, with as much joy as grief allowed. The cave breathed around her, patient and permanent. The river flowed on, indifferent to human sorrow but somehow holding space for it anyway. The stone stood, testament to everyone who'd ever chosen continuation over surrender. And Iris, like Greta before her, like every stubborn human who'd ever carved their name into permanence, chose to remain. Not because staying was easy, but because leaving would mean abandoning the woman she worked so hard to become. She pulled the blanket tighter and watched stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow she'd wake to light moving across stone. She'd make tea and tend her garden. She'd continue the work of transformation that had no end point, only daily choices to keep breathing, keep moving, keep carving beauty from grief. The cave had given her what she needed: witness without judgment, darkness that held light, stone that remembered. Now she would give back to Theo and Nora, to future visitors, to anyone who needed proof that survival was possible, that grief could be survived, that continuing was the bravest and most ordinary miracle. The river flowed on. The stone stood. The light returned. And Iris, at last, was home. Some places hold more than history. They hold transformation. Iris bought a cave for $250, thinking she found a place to disappear. Instead, she discovered that survival isn't about moving on or letting go, but about continuing, despite every reason not to. Greta taught her this across 77 years, that grief carved into stone becomes testimony rather than tomb, that darkness can witness without judging, that the bravest act is choosing to remain visible when disappearing would be easier. The cave wasn't shelter from life, it was the crucible where life learned to continue. And sometimes that's all healing is, waking each morning and choosing presence over absence, light over forgetting, the weight of both grief and joy carried forward together. The river flows on. The stone stands. We continue.